Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Today we have an interesting hand where I take a fairly standard line early in the hand, and then we end up making something pretty great by the river. So let's take a look at what happens. We are playing pretty deep stacked. We are playing 2,000 to 4,000. I am playing with about a 45 big blind stack. Loose aggressive kid raises. This is the same player from the previous video. If you've not watched last week's hand, definitely go back and watch that. You can find all the past hands on my YouTube channel. You can just Google or search on YouTube Jonathan Little and it should come up. It'll be under the strategy videos. Or you can find them on Poker News. So make sure you go back and watch all of them. We have a lot of hands uploaded for you to learn from. So anyway, this loose aggressive kid raises to 8,000. Previously, he raised 5-4 suited in an earlier position, so presumably he's raising pretty wide from the seat. Not that 5-4 suited is an insane raise or anything like that, but it certainly shows that the player is at least capable of raising with more than only premium hands. And we do have him tagged as a loose aggressive kid, so all that makes perfect sense. So do we 3-bet or do we just call with ace-jack offsuit in the big blind? I'm typically going to call, but I'm calling with a lot of hands in this scenario, and I like having reasonably strong hands like this in the calling range. I'd probably 3-bet ace-queen with the intention of not folding it. I would 3-bet hands like nines or better with the intention of not folding. And then I'd also 3-bet some sporadic junky hands, but I like calling. When I'm getting great odds like this, I'm going to be calling a ton because we have to put in 4,000 more to win what's going to be a 22,000 pot. So we need to win like less than 20% of the time. And we're going to win way more than 18% of the time or whatever it is with almost anything. So you really don't want to be 3-betting that often in this spot because it turns down those immediate odds. Whenever your opponent's giving you great immediate odds to call, calling's usually fine. Of course, we are out of position, so we're not going to realize all of our equity. Like, say we have 7-2 offsuit, we would call if we knew the hand was just over and no more betting could take place. But betting can take place, and that's why you probably still want to fold garbage like 7-2 offsuit. Or 3-bet it for fun. All right, flop comes ace, 10, 6, 2 hearts. I have the jack of hearts. I'm definitely going to check here, looking to check call. If we check raise, our opponent's only going to continue when he has a hand that beats us for the most part, or a very good draw. And against ace-jack, or with ace-jack, we're not in great shape versus that range. So this is definitely a spot where we want to check call. There could be a case made for check raising based on the fact that if we're against a good loose aggressive kid and we want to be somewhat balanced, this is one of the best hands in our range. So you always want to ask yourself, what are the best hands in your range? And if ace-jack is one of the best hands, you should strongly consider check raising it sometimes. And the best hands in our range here are pocket sixes. Like I said, I'm 3-betting pocket tens most likely. Ace 10, ace 6, and then ace jack, because I said I'm 3-betting ace queen, right? So if this is really just the third best hand in our range, or fourth best hand in our range, ace 10, ace 6, pocket sixes, and now ace jack, this could just easily be a check raise for value, especially against a loose aggressive kid. If your opponents are going to be calling your check raises very wide, as often they should, you can conceivably check raise this hand and just be willing to bet the turn and then maybe check or bet the river, depending on how the board runs out. So I do check call this time, but I think check raising here is also certainly fine. As your opponent's more inclined to blindly barrel you, you should be more inclined to check call. If your opponent's going to think your check raise is obviously a draw or you obviously trying to push him around, you should be more inclined to check raise. Of course, you can't really expect too many people to check raise on a board containing an ace from out of position versus a preflop raiser because this should be way better for the preflop raiser's range than it should be for the preflop callers, even if the preflop raiser is somewhat loose. So we do call this time, but I could also see check raising with this hand being fine. Ace 9, ace 8, maybe not so much. Turns a 4 of hearts, which is great. I check. My opponent bets 20,000 now, so half pot. And sticking with the plan, I'm just going to call. Notice if my opponent does have an ace, he's putting money in behind, and he's almost certainly going to fold if I check raise now that the third heart comes. So that's not good. We want to keep him in with all those hands like ace 9 that are drawing pretty much dead. If he has ace king or ace queen, maybe we could bluff him, but not really in the business of trying to bluff people off of strong hands, so that's not such a good idea. If he has a hand like a flush, we're completely screwed or pretty close to being dead. Same thing if he has a set or 2 pair. So basically no better hands ever folding. And most of the worst hands are folding. And when that's the case, you usually want to just call because your opponent's going to play nearly perfectly versus a raise. A lot of people look at this spot and think I need to try to protect versus the various draws like king-queen with the king of hearts or queen-jack with the queen of hearts. But that should be a relatively small portion of your opponent's range. And given this is a loose aggressive kid, he could just be betting with hands like king, queen of clubs for fun and trying to barrel us off of our, in his mind, marginal made hand. So you definitely want to keep your opponents in this spot. If they happen to outdraw you, they outdraw you, and that's okay. So I check call. River is a king of hearts, so we have the second nuts. We could make the case for leading here. I think that would actually be reasonable. If we do lead here and get raised, we probably have to call it off, which is pretty unfortunate. Given I would lead for maybe 50K. If my opponent shoves, it'd be only 100K more into what would be a 380K pot. So I need to win, let's call it 30% of the time, and I probably will versus a loose aggressive kid. So I'm not really in love with leading. I think I'm going to check, give my opponent every opportunity to bluff. He's certainly going to value bet, I imagine, if he has the 9 of hearts or the 8 of hearts. I think a lot of good players do that. I don't think he's just going to check behind with those hands. So I like checking, giving him the opportunity to bluff. So I check, and he bets pretty big. So previously, on the previous hand, he potted it with the nuts on the river. Now he's betting a little bit less than pot, but still a very hefty bet. And I really wish he bet smaller or something like that so that I would have a much easier call. But given we've already seen him play the nuts in a very with a very big bet size on the river, I'm concerned that we could just be against the nuts. So I guess I should make it clear we're never raising for value or anything like that with the second nuts here, because he's probably only going to call us with the nuts. He may call off with the 9 of hearts, but it's not worth risking our stack in this scenario, because if he only calls with the queen or the 9, I would rather just play a medium-sized pot here and not risk going broke. It's very important to minimize the chance that you go broke in a tournament. And, like I said, the previous hand, we flopped a straight and we lost. And here, if we happen to be beat, we really just don't want to go broke. And if we are beat here, we've effectively run into 2 setups back-to-back, and we're still going to be left with about 70,000 chips if we do lose this pot. So it's a tough spot here, but I think we have a very easy call. The way we play this hand, we have a very clear decision. Calling is the only play that makes sense. And we're against the queen high flush. So when this kind of thing happens, a lot of people get really annoyed and really frustrated, and they think the poker gods are out to get them or something like that. And you just have to make sure that you remain sane. And look at it like this. I mean, we made a straight in a multi-way pot. We ended up not getting sacked or even losing very many chips. We lost like 25 big blinds, which is great. And then in this hand, we did get taken for a ride, while our opponent bet the flop and bet the turn, drawing pretty thin, right? He was drawing to 4 outs on the flop, and then 9 outs on the, 9, 10, 11, 12 outs on the turn. And he happened to get there. And sometimes they're going to get there. And when they get there, you just have to make sure you don't go broke. And if our opponent was a little bit of a more tight, straightforward player, I could actually see folding the river if we think our opponent's only betting with the nuts. But the fact that this player is a loose, aggressive kid means that he should have more hands in his range than just the nuts. But sometimes loose, aggressive players do just show up with the nuts, and that's a little bit of variance that you can't do anything about. And we're stuck here with what is going to be a 20 big blind stack, but even then, having 20 big blinds is way better than having 0 big blinds. Also, a lot of people will look at this and think I should have raised on the flop or the turn to protect my hand. But notice that our opponent was drawing relatively thin throughout this pot. And if I raise at any point, it lets him fold. And you just have to be okay with your opponent's drawing to draws that aren't going to get there that often. And this is really the absolute best draw he could have, right? Like imagine instead he had a hand like 8-7 with the 8 of hearts. Maybe he plays it in a similar way and we end up just winning a bunch of money. So don't be results oriented. Don't think, oh man, my opponent had exactly the queen eye flush draw. I should have played this differently. Because you don't know your opponent has exactly the queen eye flush draw. When your opponent has ace 10 and you check raise him on the flop and jam on the turn and he snaps you off and you're just out, you don't feel quite so good about that because you get it in with stones 0% equity. So that's going to be it for this hand. Don't be results oriented and play in a manner that doesn't lead to you getting stacked with your good but non-nut hands. If you enjoyed this video, definitely let the people at Poker News know. And if you like this kind of analysis, check out my poker training site at pokercoaching.com. There we have a lot of interactive hand quizzes where we go through situations like this. And instead of me telling you what I did, you test your own skills and you say what you would do. And then I would go back and tell you what I think about your plays. So check it out at pokercoaching.com. There you can get a free 7-day trial. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know. And be sure to check back next week for another educational poker hand. Thanks for watching.